All right, well, welcome everyone to our forum, The Rethink Dissecting the Truth. This event is sponsored by Crew and InterVarsity Ministries. Crew meets Wednesday nights at 7:30. InterVarsity meets Friday nights for their Bible study and Sunday mornings for their service. And without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first professor. Our first speaker is Professor Len Hortensi. He's been a teacher for about 30 years in the world of physics, and he prefers to capture his students' attention by demonstration. He's going to be talking tonight about it's not religion versus science, or is it? Which model follows the evidence? Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Professor Len Hortensi to the stage.
How you guys doing? Wow, I'm honored that it's a beautiful sunny night and you're here. It was so beautiful. I wanted to just skateboard, but that would have been weird in here. But I appreciate y'all for coming and listening to me sometimes rant and hopefully try to make you a little laugh and think, and that's pretty much the goal. What we're going to do tonight is just give you a brief introduction about me and where I'm coming from, and then defining science and what the scientific method really was meant to be, and how I'm going to probably go off on a little bit of a tangent on what it's turning into in modern day society. And if you've heard something since you were 5, how common sense may deceive you, because whatever you hear since you were 5 years old, 8 hours a day, seems common to your senses. And it might not be true. You know, that's why we thought the Earth was in the center of the solar system for a long time. It made perfectly good sense to our senses. So I want you to be aware that it might be messing with your worldview a little bit, messing with your paradigm a little bit, and that's okay, because the whole point for you to be here is because you want to grow a little bit and you want to develop, hopefully, some critical thinking. Then why are we here at Alfred? I'm gonna tell you that punchline at the end. I'll start off with a little bit and then tell you that later. And then I'm gonna kind of give you this idea of what a worldview or religion ends up being in your heart and in my heart. And some people are religious without knowing they're religious. And you might be religious without knowing you're religious. If you're here going, oh, I'm an atheist, you might find out after today, it's like, oh man, I'm an atheist. That's very religious. You've made a faith statement, and I might call you on it. And I hope you stay and ask us questions, and we get some dialogue. Everybody's way back there. I mean, I feel like in my classroom, I want to make everybody sit up front just because I'm short, you know, and the glare will keep you awake. And back there, you can snooze. So feel free when we start asking questions later that everybody just kind of comes up a little bit closer. And Dr. Miano is here, and it'd be nice if everybody just got into a smaller group and we talked about stuff. That's the best part of the night, is that dialogue that we have at the end. So I highly encourage you to show up. So, are you ready? All right, so here we go. I was born a short, bald Italian kid, right? Mother put me on an all-meat diet. And then I experimented with hair later in life. And then I discovered women, which really ruined everything having to do with any kind of Christianity. So I moved toward agnosticism. And then now I'm still back to a short, bald Italian guy, so full circle, all right? But I love science. And so ever since I was a kid, I was winning science fairs because science was so cool, right? And I love it. I'm still doing it. Every day I still get to go to school and do science because it's just the coolest thing you could possibly imagine doing. But the whole point of science could be bad or good, okay? Science means to know. We get this concept of trying to ask questions and try to figure out the answer. And that's what I love. I love little kids. They're the best scientists in the world because they ask me every day, why does that work? Why does that work? Why does that work? And I almost get frustrated when I have seniors in high school and college students not asking anything. Just the only question they have is, how do I get an A? You know, how do I pass the course? You know, they really don't care anymore. And it drives me nuts. So I always get so gravitated towards students and, of all ages that want to keep asking those questions, why? And it's a little bit scary that a worldview is developing that not only is not allowing you to ask why, but they ridicule people that's probably close to my worldview and accusing us of being non-scientists, which is just downright funny, and we'll get into that in a minute. Okay? So that's this whole concept of science, and I just love science. But there was a downside. When I got to college, I didn't need my mom's religion anymore. I got science. And so I had all my answers, you know. I was smart now, and my head got really big. That's probably why I lost my hair. There's no oxygen left. And I ended up thinking, well, there you go. I got the answers to all my questions. I know how the universe started, Big Bang, you know, and I know how we got here, and I know about evolution, and I embraced that whole naturalistic worldview because I had just enough science to feel like I didn't need any other explanation, and I didn't need anything else. You know, there's this great quote that I'm probably going to misquote, but Francis Bacon, one of the original people who thought up the scientific method, Galileo, Bacon, they were like instrumental in coming up with this roadmap to follow in order to not be subjective and actually stick to the ball game here and see whether or not you can test things. And Bacon said, a little bit of science made me an atheist, but a lot of science brought me back. And it's kind of like you can know just enough to give a swell head and not know enough to be honest, to say, you know what, every time I answer one question, I got 5 more that show up. I'm clueless. A good scientist will be totally admitting that they're absolutely, truly clueless on how that all worked out. That happened. Dr. Miano's nodding right now because he spends his whole day doing that, going, wow, I just learned one thing and it just opened up a can of worms of 5 other things that we don't understand. So it's really, really an exciting thing. Okay, I love that quote. Einstein was sometimes a theist, sometimes an atheist, and he said that just because he just loved the idea of just knowing how the universe works. Okay? All right, so I'm not necessarily what you might expect. I'm not a religious person in my own mind. I really get scared by religious people. Religious people do crazy stuff. And I'm a scientist, so I want to know. But I use that science to want to know things that I can't test and I can't prove, but I can still ask. And I can still hopefully find some kind of answers that may or may not necessarily be in the realm of science anymore. Sometimes that just doesn't work out. I love this cartoon. Check this out over here. Conventional logic. That's bad. I am here. And then the religious logic, right? You know people like that? All right? Are you like that? All right, so the point I wanted to make with this is that I used to, when I was in college, use a cartoon like this to ridicule religious people because they just believed. And I wanted to know. I'm a scientist. I just wanted to know. And what I've discovered in the last 45 years of working as a scientist, that I'm finding out there's people who are, how do I word this? Scientific naturalists, that there is no God, and they've decided there isn't. Therefore, everything happened by natural processes. So if you're of that worldview, okay, now I labeled you, all right? You're a scientific naturalist, but if you're in that worldview, I want you to realize that you might find yourself guilty of this too. You just have to replace God with Darwin, or replace God with Stephen Hawking said. You gotta be careful. You might fall into this trap without even knowing it, and you might be religious without even knowing it, and then we're not having a discussion about science anymore, we're talking about your belief system. That's okay, we're going to have a beer and talk about your belief system, but if you think you're having a scientific discussion with me, you better stick to science and not your interpretations. And that's what we'll talk about today. Okay, so why are we here at Alfred? There's 4 great questions that you should be asking, and usually high school and college students don't bother asking this because you're bulletproof. But when you get to be old and my knee's falling apart and I got an 88-year-old mom, I start asking questions like this. Why don't you ask them now? Ask them now, even though you're bulletproof and you're going to live forever. Think about it just for a minute. Who am I? I mean, what's my point? Is my point just to, get married or not get married, or have kids or not have kids, and get a really good job and get paid enough where I can just do what I want? Is there more to life? Those are questions you should ask yourself. What's that got to do with my talk? I just wanted to share with you that this is something that you guys should be asking yourself. Who am I? Where did I come from? Don't be afraid to ask. What if you don't know the answer? What if I can't prove the answer? That's okay. You learn by asking the questions. That's the first step of the scientific method. Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? Are things that, again, you might not ask yourself until later in life. But I asked it because, it's familiar to me. I just lost my sister, and my mom's getting old. Those are things that are more real to me. I'm going to give you this quote that will bug some of you, hopefully. Listen to this. When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be a lunatic for you today because I'm going to say things to you that are going to undermine a worldview that you might be very comfortable with that's just not true. It's not science, it's a worldview that the evidence not only doesn't support, it actually contradicts. And if you believe in something where all my science says that couldn't have happened, and you say, tough, I believe it anyway, well then you're like that guy with the baseball. Yeah, prove it's not the way I said. And I don't want you to be like that. I want to develop a generation of critical thinkers that will ask questions, even if it's questions about their own belief system. I want brave critical thinkers that will question their own belief system. Okay? Hopefully. So I'm going to be the raving lunatic and share with you some things that might bug you. Joe, did you know you're going to be a raving lunatic today? Because I think he's got some stuff to share with you too. Okay? First thing I got to do is give you the definition of evolution. It's like a bait and switch for used car salesmen. They use this word, and then you find out later they switched the meaning of the word, and then they proved one thing, but they said it proved the other thing. If you don't believe me, read a bio book and look at what happens in the first 3 pages, and then look at what happens in the rest of the book. They switched the word on you. They switched the definition. Let's go through some of the definitions. One of the definitions is cosmic evolution. First there was nothing, and then it exploded, and then there was everything. And that's what scientific naturalists, Stephen Hawking and the boys, have said happened about 13.5 billion years ago. Okay? Chemical evolution should have been just hydrogen, but somehow heavier and heavier elements came, and then supernova made even heavier elements, and all this stuff is happening. Now, I wasn't there, and we weren't streaming that at the time 13.5 billion years ago, so I have no idea, but I do know you can't test it. So be aware that when you hear someone say a statement like that in an astronomy book, they're making it up. You might not know you're making it up because you agree with it. And if you hear something you agree with, you'll go, yep. You gotta be careful. And I'm trying to train you in a half hour to undo everything you've had since 3rd grade. Good luck. All right? So, stellar and planetary evolution. And we've never seen a star actually form. Oh, but what about the cellular nurseries I learned in astronomy class? That guy was pretty sure that's where stars form. Yeah, well, it's a big cloud of gas that's actually giving off a little bit of light. But we found out that you need more gravity than we have to overcome the gas. Our gas molecules are moving so fast, the pressure is greater than gravity. So there's no explanation why a star forms. Once it forms, it's doing quite well, as you can tell from ours. But to actually have it begin, there's some laws that are being violated that we're pretty sure we know about. And they don't know how stars are formed, if they're formed, whether they showed up. We know how they die, though. We've got to watch that one. Okay? Organic evolution. Page 3 of the bio book says the law, not the theory of the law of biogenesis. Life comes from life. Page 4 through 922 then go on to tell you that life came from non-life. Just give it enough time and miracles happen. And most of you might be okay with that. I'm not, because I'm a scientist. Yeah, show me. And they can't show me, actually, all the evidence showing me it could have happened, and that might bug some of you. And that's okay, that's why I'm here. Raving lunatic. Macroevolution is going from an amoeba to a multicellular animal, from a multicellular animal to a mouse. And what makes a mouse a man? 65 million years, all right? I mean, like, come on. That's what you've been told, and you might be comfortable that a mouse evolved into everything after the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago when a meteor hit the Yucatan Peninsula and everything went crazy and nothing was left except the mice and shrews that were eating dino blood. I don't know, it's crazy. The evolution of morality and consciousness from mere animal, that's a mystery, man. My friend Jeremy's a philosopher, and he goes into amazing depth of that. If you got a question later about that, it's extraordinary that, we just assume, well, if we evolve enough from the apes, we become feeling bad when we do things wrong, as if laws and code and morality just could evolve for a reason. And there's questions to that, okay? The last one is called microevolution. I hate the word, but people use it, so I'll use it. And that is variation within a kind of animal. A wolf, coyote, fox, and every dog on the planet used to be kind of a wolf-dog kind of animal. And the variety is unbelievable. I mean, there's chihuahuas out there, right? That would not be able to survive without Paris Hilton's purse. But it's still a wolf. It's still a wolf. If you could talk that chihuahua into breeding with a wolf, it would have puppies. Oh my goodness. I think you should make the chihuahua the boy and wolf the girl. And I don't know. It's just a weird thought. That would be the ugliest puppies on the planet. All right? But it's still a wolf. And we've done this thing for like 4,000 to 6,000 years. And we still haven't changed from one kind of an animal to another kind of animal. But somehow nature did it without any steering mechanism, way better than humans could do it, with design and intent. That's not good science. I'm sorry, it's just not. Those are called religious, non-scientific religious views. Only that one has been observed, okay? So is it science? When most of Stephen Hawking's book has that in the middle, is it science? I don't know, okay? So here we go. So a lot of time, I spend the time going around to colleges and telling people about how real science seems to disagree with the naturalistic worldview. And actually, it supports a biblical worldview. Blows students away. What? The Bible? You mean all those little folklores and stories? Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, you gotta be kidding me. Right? And I'm like, yeah, well, come to one of my talks. If you're brave, show up a week from now, and we're gonna do something like that about Adam and Eve and the flood. I'll touch on it a little bit today, okay? So, it doesn't seem to change their minds though, man. I talk to people, we have debates, I go there, we get small groups, and they sit there, and it's as if they weren't listening to anything I said. It ain't working. I give them all this evidence, not working. I don't know, it just doesn't work. So I wonder why. I'm a scientist, I'm wondering why. So what did I do? I'm thinking maybe it's just Jesus and Darwin are always gonna be fighting, and it's got nothing to do with logic. I love that, sorry. Who's winning? I don't know. I really think Jesus is kind of like a friend. But he's got his eyeballs going. It's serious. All right. So anyway, so here are some of the things I speak about. Okay. I talk about DNA. I'm not talking about it today because I got Dr. Miano from the University of Rochester to do that. So I'm going to just briefly touch on the fact that I'm going to show you some quotes. That there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which could cause information to originate by itself in matter. All right? You getting that? There is no way information just shows up. We've never seen it happen. Yet, DNA, as you're going to find out, is unbelievably packed with information, more than supercomputers than the militaries. Here's another quote. When its progress along the chain of transmission events is traced backwards, every piece of information leads to a mental source, the source of the sender. You with me on that? Okay, so if you're going to have information, you have to start with a source and a receiver, and then a mechanism to get them to communicate. Hold on, it's worse than that. They both have to agree on the mechanism, right? So if I use English and my receiver's not using English Spanish, then we ain't communicating. The information doesn't get transferred from one place to another. I love this example. Anybody a computer geek? I mean, anybody know that stuff? I mean, you understand bits and bytes and all that stuff? All right, check this out. Paul Revere, one if by land, two if by sea. You remember what that meant? Some dude that volunteered to go up to the North Church in Boston and stick a light in the window. And if there's one light in there, Paul Revere runs by, sees one light, one if by land. That means the British are coming by land. If he sees two lanterns in the North Church, then the British are coming by sea. Right? The dude risked his life to go up to the top, puts the lantern up there. Now get this now. That's 2 bits. Light on or light off. The first bit doesn't even count. There was always going to be one light up there. Will there be 2? So everybody had to agree ahead of time that the senders and the receivers both agreed that 1 lamp means one thing, 2 lamps mean the other. The British busted the guy, bring him back downstairs, saying, "What are you doing? You're trying to send messages." He goes, "What are you talking about?" And they had to let him go because they didn't know the code. All right, remember that when Joe starts talking? They didn't know the code, so they had to let him go because they couldn't prove that 2 lanterns up there meant something different than 1. You see, it was information, and we're just talking about 1 bit. The first bit didn't count, light on. Second bit, light off or on, 0 or 1, 0 or 1. All that information in 1 bit. All right? And you know what happens when you see a red light, and then near it a green light, and then in the middle a yellow light. You know what it means. We all agreed it. We all agreed ahead of time. It's information. You know? Green means go, red means stop, yellow means go real fast. You know what it means. All right? Okay, so how about another example? A penny. If you found a penny, would you with a straight face say, "Wow, millions of years of natural processes made that piece of metal just, you know, erosion and naturalistic processes made that round piece of metal that's not even copper anymore." Okay? No, you know why? It's too much detail. It's too much information, right? If you really look carefully, I mean, Abe Lincoln is sitting right in there. That's pretty impressive. Okay? So, you know, 3rd graders can tell design for naturalistic processes. I just can't get my college students to do it. I can't get people who are so entrenched in their worldview to just admit it. They found a penny. They would not say it happened by chance. Matter of fact, if you get off the landing pad in Mars and you're like, "Yes, I'm the Neil Armstrong of my generation. I'm the first guy on Mars," right? And you look down and there's that penny on Mars. All of a sudden your shoulders will go down and you'll go, you know, I mean, I'm not the first guy here. It's a penny. How do you know a penny means you're not the first guy there? Because you know in your heart, you can tell design just by looking at it. There's information there, all right? Scientists are trying to quantify that. Why is it that we know that's design and a piece of driftwood that looks like Richard Nixon isn't? How do we know, you know? And they're identifying how to differentiate between design and non-design. It's kind of cool to think about. Design and not design. Did the erosion happen? You seen the look on the ranger's face when I looked at it and said, "Yeah, millions of years of erosion and water. That's amazing." And she's like, "No. There's a guy that designed that." I'm like, "Well, you believe in design. But me, I think there was erosion. And then she's like, what are you, nuts or crazy, mister? You know, and I said, no, really. And I got on my motorcycle, I drove around the backside, and that looked designed too, you know? And my question is, if a piece of rock, if you're an honest scientist, which means you have to be a third grader right now, because if you're in college, you might be tainted by your worldview. But if you were an honest third grade scientist, you would have known that rock couldn't have happened by chance. The details on Abe Lincoln's face, the mole on his face, it's just too much information to be saying that happened by natural processes. You can't say it. You just, not a good scientist can say that, okay? But if Mount Rushmore, front and back, are designed, a rock is designed. I asked that ranger lady, I said, so you're saying this rock didn't happen by chance? You're saying this rock happened by a designer? And she goes, 40 years with scaffolding and 300 people carving that nose. And I'm like, you believe that? She goes, I got pictures. And I'm like, well, all right. You know, and I'm pretending I didn't believe that it was designed and created by a mind. And like that Werner Gitt thing, it started in the mind, and then it translated into the real world out here, the physical world. So I asked her, I go, ma'am, do you believe in evolution? And she said, well, of course. And I said, so a rock is designed, without a question. But the dude that the rock looks enough like for me to recognize from a rock that is Abe Lincoln, with a skin cell that's got more information in it than all the terabytes of military computers, that was natural processes. Weird. It's like people have lost their mind. Third graders get this, but adults aren't getting it. It's weird. It's almost like hypnosis. I don't know why. But Abe Lincoln is the most amazing physical machinery you could imagine. And then on top of that, there's this amazing mind that changed the world. You know, it's not even the level of the hardware. We're talking about the software too. It's just amazing. Okay, so here's the problem. Observational science, like in DNA, it looks like evolutionary changes, and Dr. Sanford was going to be here next week to talk about that, so I'm going to touch on it next week because he wasn't able to make it due to a conflict. But the point being, evolutionary changes are being contradicted by observational science. Let me say that again so it sinks in. Observational science, like things we actually can test in the lab, contradict what you're reading in your textbook. Really? Yes. Why is it in my textbook? I don't know. If you were a conspiracy theorist, you would think they're out to lie to us. I don't know. What happened to science? I really miss science. All right? So it looks like there's intelligence behind DNA. Okay? Look at this quote. All point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce information and not increase. Okay? Remember that. If you come back next week, we're going to do that like crazy in detail. Dr. Sanford, we're going to skip this quote because you're going to show up next week. See? Teasing you. It's teasing you. All right? So we'll talk about that. Which way are we going? Are we going up or are we going down? Okay? All right, how about this? Carbon-14 has a half-life. And carbon-14's half-life is about 5,400 years. And therefore, there should be no carbon-14 left in anything older than like 100,000 years. Diamonds are 1 billion years old. So, no carbon-14, right? Why waste the money to test it? We already know it's true. You hear that? That's not a fact, that's an assumption, which makes an ass out of you and me. Right? Remember, assumption is something you believe to be true, so why bother testing it? Right? So finally somebody got around to testing carbon-14 in a diamond. Son of a gun. That diamond was 1 billion years old with one radioactive method, and it's about 14,000 years with another method. Wow. Which one's right? The one that agrees with the textbook. You gotta be careful. You might be not educated like you thought, okay? I go around and do talks about how it's possible that the earth could be younger than what we're telling people. It drives people crazy. I've been ridiculed. If you Google my name, 3 of them down will be young earth creationist, idiot, loon, Hortensia. I can't believe he really even has a degree. It just goes on and on, because if they can't refute what I'm telling you, you gotta pick on me. Call me short and bald, yes, but stupid? I don't know. We're gonna have a discussion about that, all right? Pride, all right? But here are some of the things I talk about, and it's a lot of fun. Here, jot one down and ask me someday, and we'll go out for lunch, and I'll tell you some of the things. Listen to this one. The vast majority of dating methods actually, surprisingly, you're never gonna hear this anywhere but me, actually say that the earth is younger than we thought. I don't know how young it is, because I'm a scientist and I gotta say, I don't know, I can't test it. But the evidence leans or balances itself between old age and new age. Young age dating methods actually win out about 10 to 1. Are you surprised? For every dating method that makes it look old, there's about 10 dating methods that it looks like it's young. So what's my answer? I don't know. Agnostic, I don't know. Gnostic means to know. I don't know. I'm a scientist. I can't test it. It's where my faith takes over, but I admit I have faith. I don't mind people who are of faith. I just don't like the ones that are still pretending they're scientific. You got to read Hawkins' book. It's hysterical. It's all philosophy after he ridiculed the philosophers in the first chapter. And then he just went out and said, we're the philosophers now. And then he went out. All right, how about the Grand Canyon? When I was a kid, the Grand Canyon was millions of years old, and those layers formed because the Colorado River dug the Grand Canyon, and all those sedimentary rock layers were formed over millions and millions of years. And this canyon just formed, and all the sedimentary rock layers were all formed over millions of years, and fossils were formed here, and then it was a million years before this fossil was formed, so this one turned into this one by, I don't know, magic. You find out that DNA contradicts the ability for that to happen. But that's what you're being taught, and you hear it, and you hear it, and you hear it, and you see little cartoons when you're a kid, Sarah, you're going the wrong way, and a big meteor, you know, Land Before Time, and all that stuff is embedded in your brain. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It's Littlefoot. All right, so it's stuck in your head. You can't help but seeing that meteor hit, and all the dinosaurs going extinct 65 million years ago. That's the Grand Canyon. But a scientist would say, if this was formed over millions of years, how come there's not dirt in between? Heck, there's dirt on my TV set after a week. Don't you think there'd be kind of dirt layer in between limestone and sandstone? How come it's like nothing in between? And how come there's no erosion in between if there was millions of years between layers? So if you look at it objectively, it doesn't follow. So I've done a lot of research in there, and you make this stuff underwater. A watery grave, a whole bunch of water and tsunamis and moving around. That's what you do. So, am I right? Did I have a video camera going? Do I know if I'm right? No, I wasn't there to see the Grand Canyon. There's Native American legends that they saw it form. They saw a dam break and all the water just rush out and carve the canyon. But maybe it's just Native American folklore. It's not very good science, right? So, without a video camera, who's right? Neither, or both. Not both, but we don't know, right? You see what I mean? An honest scientist says, unless there was a video camera going, I have no idea how the Grand Canyon was formed. But the evidence points more toward a catastrophe making the layers and a dam breaking making the water cut the canyon. That's more in line with what we have observed. How do I know this? Because the last slide wasn't the Grand Canyon, it's Mount St. Helens. And those rock layers were formed in a couple days. And the canyon was formed when the dam broke and all the water from Spirit Lake kind of emptied it off, dug a canyon in a day. And I got video. So if you can see the Mount St. Helens forming in a day, and it's a 1/60th scale model, that's pretty cool. Did I prove it? No, but I am gathering evidence. So observational science points more toward a horrendously bad year on planet Earth versus millions of years. Okay? Comets, there's an Oort cloud that gave you all the new comets, right? See, comets don't last more than 10 to 100,000 years. They burn out. That's what the tail is. Piece of the comet that's no longer attached. So how many times can it go around the sun before it disappears? And the answer is not that many. So why do we still have comets? So what does somebody of the old worldview do when they find out this? Do they immediately come over to my side of the paradigm and go, "You're right, the Earth is young"? Oh, heck no. They make up a belief-saving device. A belief-saving device, like the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud is a cloud that's so far out there you'll never see it. And it's so far behind Pluto, and that's where all the new comets are. And once in a while they collide with each other, and it's the nursery, right? And it exists in every single, yep, I agree. Yes. All right, so it exists in every astronomy book. It just doesn't exist in real life because we'll never be able to observe it. How convenient that they made up something to save the belief system. Okay, there shouldn't be any comets, but there are. The Earth is still old, therefore there must be an Oort cloud somewhere that gives us new comets to replace the old ones. That's lame. I'm sorry, that's lame. That's not good science, okay? So I call those things belief-saving devices. And for homework, I want you to start noticing belief-saving devices in your worldview, in your life, on the news, and in your textbooks. Find the belief-saving devices. Well, evidence says that biogenesis, life only comes from life. But there is no God, so therefore life must have come from non-life. So here's our belief-saving device. Lightning hit the soup of ammonia and methane, and ta-da! You know, and then, and Dr. Miano will tell you how ridiculous that is to make the most sophisticated operating system on the planet out of a lightning hitting soup. It just doesn't happen like that. It's like having Mount Rushmore happening because lightning hitting it. It just doesn't happen. So remember that, belief-saving device. I want you to look for them in your life. They're everywhere to keep the old belief systems intact. If you want to say BS device for short, that's okay with me. It's okay. Okay. All right. So creation, evolution, they're both interpreting the evidence through their worldview. They're both religious because the interpretation is not tested. Okay? So here's a presumption. Presumption means reliability, what we assume at the onset, like we can trust our eyes. That's a presumption. Okay? So competing worldviews of creation and evolutionists have different presumptions. And if that's true, different rules for interpreting the evidence. You get where I'm going with this? All right, so evidence by itself will not resolve the worldview conflict. That's why I've been totally unsuccessful sharing evidence with all these college students all over the place. It's not working. And the reason is you guys might have a different worldview than me and you're not going to hear a damn word I'm going to say. Okay? So I can walk up to you and show you a fossil and then you go, no, that's not what I see. And they go, what about now? This is evidence for the flood. No. And then what about Mount Zion? No. What about the species? No. What about DNA? No. See, the worldview determines your eyesight. Okay? So just because Saturn's rings shouldn't be there anymore because they're unstable and they shouldn't last more than 50,000 years, we'll come up with a belief-saving device on why Saturn's rings are still there. Okay? So anyway, I want to just go that this cannot be solved on its own. Okay? So it's really two worldviews, science versus religion. I don't think so. It's belief system, religion versus religion. It's just, I'm the one who was admitting I'm religious in the sense that I know when I believe and I can't test it. And other people are lying to you and say, well, yeah, everybody who's a credible scientist believes that. So it's really God versus dirt. In the beginning, God, or in the beginning, somehow the universe made itself. Okay? So you should be aware that naturalism influences the way you interpret the facts. Okay? If you've missed anything I've said today, be aware of that. If you have a naturalistic worldview or you have a Christian worldview, it will affect your eyesight. Okay? So you believe before you see, and then the evidence seems to just agree with what you already believe. It's really weird. Okay? So all those things are evidence. All right? So we're going to run out of time, but I wanted to just show you like a T-Rex fossil. How old is that fossil, you might ask? And so the guy says, this dinosaur is 65 million years, 3 months, and 8 days old. And you say, wow, that's incredible. How can you be so accurate with the dating? He says, well, when I started here, the curator told me the dinosaur was 65 million years old, and I've been working here for 3 months and 8 days. And that is the double fixed one, okay? So I want you to look this up. I kind of ran out of time, but I want you to look this up. In the old worldview, dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. And then they cut a femur of a T-Rex in half to get it aboard the helicopter, and there was blood tissue inside. First they thought it was contaminated, then they thought it was something else, and then they always had an explanation for it, but it's real, and it's tissue, and there might even be blood vessels involved. And it's fascinating to me, a little Jurassic Park thing thrown on here, you know? And it happened. So look it up, and you'll see the worldview explain it, the belief-saving devices that people have that believe in an old Earth, and then you'll have young Earth people that are going, see, it's proof. It's not proof. It's just that it's your worldview. See, your worldview decides what you do with blood in a dinosaur. I happen to know, because I have some really smart friends, that tissue just doesn't last 65 million years. So I kind of lean toward another way. You might not. Your belief system might be totally okay with you having blood coming out of a 65 million year old T-Rex. Guess where all the grant money's going, though? To find out how blood vessels can survive 70 million years. See? The belief system is even dictating where the grant money goes, and therefore the only evidence you're going to read about on the internet is evidence from people who already agreed in the worldview that gave them the grant money. And you're being suppressed. Okay? So creation, evolution, same hardware, different system. So summarize, naturalism is a religion worldview, no greater than any other interpretation, yet in spite of the First Amendment, the evidence seems to be contradicting this worldview. And you're not hearing about it unless you're brave enough to come to one of these talks. Because you're not going to read it in your Bible book, and you're not going to read it in your geology book. That's a shame. I'm sad about it, because if you only hear one possible explanation, you are not being educated. Okay? You're being indoctrinated. And that's scary. Just ask Hitler and the boys what indoctrination can do to a nation. You're hearing one side of the story, you're not being educated. You should get your money back from Alfred if you're doing that. All right, I'm only kidding. All right, so why am I here? Well, to turn on your BS detectors and encourage both models to be taught, education versus indoctrination. Okay? I love this, my final quote here. Let the children have their minds kept open, close no doors to their knowledge, shut no door to them, let them have both evolution and creation, and then the truth will win out in the end. You'll never guess who said that. Clarence Darrow, the one who actually was defending evolution biology guy in the Scopes trial, the monkey trial. I take his advice. I want both to be taught. I want you to teach the controversy. And that's what I'm hoping you do. Okay? So, try to avoid this when you leave. Promise? Literally. Completely support your view without changing it up. Big love. That's what we do. Don't do that. Go look at the other point of view, like I do. I read all the evolutionary documentation. I already know mine. Okay? So, I want to share that with you, that there is evidence. You just have to open your eyes to something you might not be aware of. Okay? So I really appreciate you listening to me rant probably longer than I should. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ortenzi. Our next speaker. I guess it's not. Whatever. Our next speaker is Dr. Joe Miano from the University of Rochester. He's a doctor of molecular biology, and he's going to be talking to us about biology and a few other things about DNA. So, welcome to Dr.
Thank you, Dottie. Thank you all for being here. And can we also just give it up again for Professor Ortenzi for an outstanding. He had a prop. He's getting my talk out.
You know what I'm doing.
He's had a prop that he didn't use. I don't know.
I got my prop.
I think I could use this in my house. Okay, so all right. So my name's Joe. I work up at the University of Rochester. Any Coldplay fans here? You may recognize that. So I swiped the title of my talk from Coldplay, whose lyrics we could probably spend a whole day on interpreting. And I want you to know that I'm a scientist first and foremost. I got my PhD at New York Medical College, and I've been at the University of Rochester now for 15 years. And I'm a Christian. Okay, I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. I believe in creationism. I reject the notion that we came from dirt. I go to the Father's house. You can go visit. It's an awesome church up north there. And I'm very happy to be here today to tell you about some of the stuff I fuss with in the laboratory, and also why I think, as I mentioned earlier, why I think that we were designed, and that it's not just random events over millions and millions and millions of years. I'm not going to talk about this at all right? Professor Ortenzi already introduced some of these things to you. I'm not interested in this so much. What I'm interested in is how did it all begin? How did life begin? How did DNA begin? That's really what I fuss with in my head. And that's really, I think, why I was called to do science in the laboratory, because it's just fascinating to me on a day-to-day basis to continue to learn about things that have been around for as long as it's been around, and yet now we're just discovering it. And we think, oh, we invented it, but it's been there. So whatever viewpoint you have about the origin of life, the viewpoint must explain very complex things like this, which, how many biology majors are here, by the way? Is there anybody here who's a biology major? Come on, don't be shy. Only one biology major in the whole room? My heavens. Okay, well, when I was taking biology, this poster was in the hallway, and it's very complex. You can't read it. Even if you got up here, you can read it because it's out of focus. But whatever worldview one has, it must explain a lot. And this is just metabolism, which is one aspect that's going on inside of your cells, all 20 trillion or however many there are. So I want to talk about nuclear genetic information, okay, and specifically deoxyribonucleic acid, or as you know, DNA. So the first thing I want to say is that every living thing that we know of has DNA, okay? So whether it's a tomato, whether it's Sir Paul McCartney up there, whatever it is, it has DNA. And chemically, it's the same, regardless. What's different is the information, but chemically, you grind up all the cells, you isolate DNA, and you say, what's the chemistry? It's all the same. But what I want you to sort of get in your head is that the critical thing, what makes us unique and sets us apart from the rest of the 2 million species, is how the information is ordered. Okay, so DNA is informational, we're going to talk about that. How is that laid out? How is that planned? How is that designed? By the way, I'm a scientist, so I'm going to tell you, honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. I wasn't there, and there's no way I can begin to test it. So just want to be clear about that. So Jeremy, who's our leader right here, off to my right or left, he's always telling me to define your terms. So I'm going to give you some quick definitions because it looks like most of you are non-biologists. So Professor Ortenzi mentioned code, so these are my definitions. You may have different ones, but code is any one of many types of information packets. Now we're talking about DNA, found in DNA. Okay? We're going to see that DNA is just replete with codes. A gene. Ooh, I love this question because I often ask it of my students, and they look at me in bewilderment like, are you kidding? That's the question. But it's actually a very difficult term to define. Here's my definition. It's a variable segment of DNA that yields a functional entity controlling a cell's biology. Genome. How many here have heard, I like polling audiences because it helps me gear how I present the material. How many here have heard of genome or the Genome Project? Yes. 15 years ago, it might have been 4 of you, but the genome now has been figured out for us, for actually many millions of us. And it's essentially your genetic personhood. We all are endowed with a very unique program. We're all different. At about 3 to 10 million nucleotides. The blueprint's about 6 billion if you count both strands of the DNA. And we differ, each one of us, just randomly take 2 people, differ between 3 and 10 million places across that 6 billion blueprint of life. Isn't that cool? Genomics is the study of genomes. That makes sense. Genetics, distinct term, study of heritable changes in a genome that confer disease, for example. Transcription. So you've heard of transcription. So scribes or transcribe, they're dictated something and they're now writing it down as the biblical scholars. So my definition is an operational function involving the precise copying of several DNA codes into another type of code, if you will, and that's RNA. We'll talk about this in a second. In fact, right here. So here it is. So transcription is merely the transfer of information hardwired in your genome, in your DNA, to a new molecule. We call that mRNA or messenger RNA. That's transcription. Translation, an operational function involving the reading of the messenger RNA to incorporate the building blocks of life. So that would be the protein. So the amino acids that make up the proteins. And this is what it looks like in schematic format. By the way, this is the central dogma of molecular biology. So the passage of information from DNA to RNA and then to protein. So from mRNA to protein, that is translation. All right. I'm not going to speak long, okay, because I want to have discussion. There's lots of theories about origins of life, lots. But I'm going to only touch upon really a few. I'm going to talk about the Miller-Urey experiment that regrettably is still being taught in biology. It's alarming, but it is. And then I want to talk about supernatural design. And there's a lot of theories about supernatural design, but I'm going to talk about, very briefly, this so-called directed panspermia. And then I'm going to talk about a God-driven creationist worldview. All right, here's the Miller-Urey experiment, classic experiment, back in the 50s, I believe. And Stanley Miller and his student did this experiment. And they, as Professor Ortenzi said, it was one of those sort of aha things, like, if I mix the right ingredients together, oh, by the way, if I mix the right things together, what am I doing? I'm actually designing the experiment. So one thing I will argue, and I argue this with my colleagues all the time, is that we are continually improving design. By the very nature of doing science, we are improving design. So they designed this experiment to show that they could generate amino acids. That was basically the major finding of this publication. By the way, this type of research is still being supported by your hard-earned tax dollars. Now, there's some problems with this, and I don't have time to go into all the details of it, not the least of which is the assumptions that are made about what the atmosphere was like. We weren't there, as Professor Hortensi said. We just weren't there. So lots of assumptions are made. But I'm not going to go into all the nuances. I will say one thing, though, that's often not talked about, which is this. How are they doing? Because they're still doing it. How are they doing this experiment? How are they getting these amino acids? Because I can tell you with certainty, with the gases that were likely present then, there's no way amino acids would have been stable. What you're not taught in the textbook is that in order to do this experiment, this designed experiment, you need a cold trap. And you need to actually trap the amino acids. Otherwise, they go away. Great. All right? But let's just say that that's okay, that we can get amino acids from a prebiotic soup, which in this experiment works. It's been shown over and over again. How many amino acids do you think they generated with this experiment? Hundreds and hundreds of different amino acids. How many amino acids are there that make up all the proteins, the building blocks of every cell in your body? 20. Now, those amino acids actually are very special amino acids because how many people? So there's only one biologist. I thought the whole biology department was coming here. Did you take organic chemistry yet? So you know the enantiomers. So there's the D and the L, the mirror images. So you know about that? So these amino acids have they come in two flavors, if you will. A D form and an L form. I don't know why there's D or L, by the way, but I bet you do. But in nature, the only amino acids that are incorporated into proteins to make us functional are D forms, not L forms. But guess what? In this experiment, it's all forms. So let's just say for fun that, yeah, the experiment's right. Forget about the cold trap. Forget about the atmospheric conditions. Forget about lightning bolts, sap, life. Let's just assume all that happened and it's right. I get amino acids. How are those amino acids going to be arrayed to make a functional protein? How is that directed? Does that just happen by chance over millions and millions of years? We're going to come back. I want you to just hold that thought. How does that occur? Let's just assume that this happened however many years ago you believe it might have happened. How did those amino acids, the right ones, the D forms, how did they all come together to make a functional protein? That's important. Oh my gosh, I didn't know, so I was way off. Over 2,000 types of amino acids, only 20 are used in life. They found hundreds, but again, the conditions were such that they got them, but we don't know how they were assembled. Now, here is Professor William Dembski, who we had the pleasure of meeting some time ago at Cornell University. And the question is this, I just want you to focus on this number here. All right, forget about this nonsense, right? This number here, which is a ridiculous number, I don't even know what that means. 10 to the 139. That's 10 with 139 zeros. And he came up with this theory based on, and you'll just have to take our word for it, his particularly, that there are this many particles in the universe, the observable universe, and this much time. So this is how he got this number for a probabilistic theory to explain the origin of the universe. So it's a crazy number, 110 to the 139, right? But this is what's even crazier. Here is a real amino acid sequence. It's the amino acid sequence of a protein we all have in our bodies called endothelin. It's a very important protein. It makes our blood vessels constrict. Maybe it made that dinosaur's blood vessels constrict, and that's why it was able to. But this is a modest, I call it on the small side of the length of the average protein that we all have. We have hundreds of thousands of proteins. What is the likelihood of amino acids in the prebiotic soup from miliaria? What's the likelihood that those amino acids, that information, which, as I told you, encodes endothelin, a very functional, important protein, would come together correctly? The answer is that, 10 to the 164, which blows away the probabilistic resources necessary to create the entire universe. And this is a small level protein. Just by contrast, the largest protein, Titan, is over 1,300 of those letters. So we wouldn't be able to put on the screen. So here's some quotes. I won't read them. You can read them yourself. And these are reputable people. These are people with PhDs. They're not dumb, okay? But they have some profound comments to make about experiments, such as the one I've been talking about. There's another one from Fred Hoyle. Nonsense. Okay? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me how this idea that's being indoctrinated into our children's heads, how that is even remotely plausibly possible. By the way, I'm not saying that I have all the answers and I know. I just know that that ain't happening. That ain't happening. Let's talk about supernatural. Whoa. Somebody's leaving. So, among supernatural design-directed mechanisms for life on Earth is this one. Who's heard of this? Directed panspermia. By the way, I make all my PowerPoint, whether I'm giving science lectures, as I will be next week in Chicago, or things like this, they're open to anyone. So I'll just, if you like it, I'm happy to give it. So directed panspermia is a theory that I believe Carl Sagan came up with some time ago, and Francis Crick. So both of them, Francis Crick and Carl Sagan. So the idea here is that life from some other part of the universe was beamed to Earth. By the way, it didn't ride on a comet because space is very inhospitable. And nothing of the order of a protein or nucleic acid would survive space. So that means it would have to be encapsulated into a bottle and delivered on a rocket ship or something to Earth. Okay? So you tell me, is that a plausible supernatural hypothesis? By the way, if it was true, if that did happen, what does that tell us? It tells me that there's design somewhere else, and I'm cool with that. I'm cool with design being in another galaxy. So we're looking, and I think they've given up those things in Puerto Rico, I believe, those radio telescopes to try to listen to see, is there anybody out there? I think they've given up on that because they really haven't heard anything. And I hope they're not funding it. But this is a theory, and you can look it up. If you have your computer, go Google it right now, you see it. By the way, there are other supernatural hypotheses for origins of life. But I will not go there tonight because I want to talk about this. So, what about this? Why not this? Why not a God-directed origin for life? So let's look at some things that might make you wonder about this. So I've defined my terms. Consider this. And by the way, this schematic you're looking at in the lower left is very simplistic. That number, the number of proteins, but we don't know, by the way, the full number of proteins involved in transcription initiation. That is, remember transcription? The copying of the DNA code onto a messenger RNA. We don't even know the full extent of that because, as Professor Ortensi correctly pointed out, every time we get an answer, there's like 5 to 10 new questions behind that revelation to us. Very simple schematic. Those proteins are hardwired into the genome. They had to be coded to be transcribed and translated to what? To, in this case, transcribe the DNA. By the way, we talk about splicing, we talk about replication. So I just picked on transcription because that's what I study in the laboratory. Question: what came first? How does one get a protein that's hardwired from an information-laden genome from nowhere? Oh, the prebiotic soup, right? But how is that information in the protein, how is it ordered? Because the DNA is hardwired to encode that. It's designed to make those proteins. Or wait a minute, maybe it was the DNA. Oh, it had to be the DNA. The DNA had to be created first, right? Oh, but wait a minute. Doesn't DNA require proteins to be made? DNA is replicated. Replication is scores of proteins involved with that. So that's something to wrestle with in your head. It's sort of one of those classic chicken egg questions. What comes first? Why not simultaneously, together? That makes some sense to me. All right, so I'm going to talk about some code now, all right? And you guys are going to tell me when there's 5 minutes. Hopefully it's not perfect. So Professor Ortenzi mentioned binary code, on, off. 1 light, 2 light, okay? DNA has 4 letters to it, 4 bits of information to it, A, C, G, T. So it's a quaternary code. And why do I know that? Well, I know it because I believe it in my heart that it is. But other people apparently have a similar thought. So here's a quote from Bill Gates. It's not like just any computer. It's the most sophisticated supercomputer ever invented. And then this is something, courtesy of Professor Ortenzi, that we're learning the language in which God created life, spoken by our future first man. Is that what it is? I guess. Back in 2000, when our code, the human genome, was actually deciphered. All right, now, once upon a time, the naturalists loved resting on this concept that DNA is mostly junk. Only 2% of it really means anything. That's just a protein. 98% of it is dispensable. No, not really. So what you see here are 2 people who really pushed that concept. And there's some papers published on it, which I don't cite here, but in red are 2 what we call exons in the code of life that, when spliced together, make a mRNA, which then is translated into a protein. Okay? But you'll see in between that is a lot of white stuff. You don't see the letters even because they're just sort of blacked out or whited out. But these gentlemen and others had the thought that those were just junk. That's just details. We don't need to think about those. Well, actually, we do, because now we know that 80% is probably an underestimate. It's probably 85 to 90% of your genome of 6 billion nucleotides are, guess what, functional. Can you imagine? I wrestle with this all the time. How do you even get your arms around 6 billion bits of information arrayed in an elegant manner so that life is created? I can't get my arms around that. But I can tell you one thing with 100% certainty. That didn't just happen over millions and millions and millions and millions of years by chance. Oops, no, that's not going to work. Let's put this one in. So, yeah, design. So there's some really important publications, 30 publications from those journals that basically support that fact, which I'm writing here, 80% of the genome function. I wish I had a lot more time because normally I have an hour, but there's lots of codes in the genome. And I'm going to tell you just about my favorite code, which are regulatory codes. Those are little snippets of DNA that instruct proteins to come in and bind and turn on genes or off genes. So we've got about 20,000 protein coding genes. God only knows how many non-coding genes we have. I wish I had time to talk about that. But it's probably about 50 to 75. So we have about 100,000 genes in our genome. Are they all sort of going on and off haphazardly? No, it's a beautiful orchestration in every single different, you have 250 distinct cell types in your body, and every one of those only transcribes a portion of that code. And the reason for that is because the snippets of DNA, those little regulatory codes that I'm going to tell you about in a second, they bind specific proteins in that cell that will uniquely turn on those specific genes. So if it's a liver cell, well, guess what? All the enzymes that are needed to deal with the alcohol that you guys buy, etc., those are in the liver. So those factors are going to turn those genes on. But guess what? In endothelial cells that line blood vessels, we don't really need those, so those are suppressed. How that happens is beautiful, and that's what my lab is all about, and understanding those little snippets of DNA. And I want to share with you now a couple stories, and then I'll close, as to why I think this is just such a masterful design that could not have possibly arisen other than through design. This is a real gene that I've been whacking on for more than 20 years. Can you imagine? There's like 100,000 genes, and I've been working on one for 20 years. You do the math. Who's nuts? So here's that those 2 exons I told you about. here, and this is an intron, and I've circled a snippet, one of those little codes that proteins bind to that will turn this gene on. Now, for the longest time, we didn't understand how that worked 20 years. Now we understand, and I'm going to tell you how. How many of you have heard of this? Show of hands. Please raise a lot of hands. Please raise a lot of hands. 1, 2, CRISPR. This is revolutionary. So you guys are going to get some techno stuff now. This is a huge game changer. Never seen anything in my life. Actually, there's nothing been like it ever in biology. This is turning our world upside down. It is going to get Nobel Prizes. One of the 2 or 3 of these people are going to get a Nobel Prize for. We thought it was this year, but it's going to be next year. But mark my words. This is a craze. It's revolutionary to the nth scale. And in a nutshell, it comes from bacteria, by the way. We owe a lot to our bacteriologists who figured this out. But I wish I had more time to tell you. It's such a cool, we can talk about it afterward. Such a cool, beautiful design, too, because there's warfare going on between those phage on top there in that picture and the bacteria. So phage outnumber bacteria 10 to 1. Phage are the most populous DNA-containing organism on the planet. And this is an awesome mechanism for bacteria to protect themselves from getting infected by DNA. It's been harnessed now to edit genomes, to do precision-guided editing so that sickle cell anemia can be cured, so that HIV can be eradicated, so that any monoallelic, I'm not talking to my brethren, any inborn error of metabolism or any genetic error that causes a life-threatening illness will be cured with CRISPR. Now let me tell you how we use it in the lab. We were the first at Rochester to use it 3 years ago, and we're very excited about it, as you can probably imagine. We went in, so this is just now a schematic of that, all those letters I showed you. Those are those 2 exons that were in red. There's that intron, that was the circled 10 base pair snippet that we know binds a factor, and we think it turns the gene on, but how do we know? Well, we did the ultimate experiment. We used CRISPR, we CRISPRized mice, and we made substitutions, very subtle substitutions in the information in that code. So we went in and we said, you know what, we're going to change that information. Boom. By the way, design. Okay, just remember, all this experiment, design. And lo and behold, below is the sequencing to confirm that we did make that mutation, and only that mutation in all 6 billion nucleotides. Lo and behold, in red on top, that's an assay we use to show that that protein that's encoded by that CNN1 that gets transcribed from that snippet of DNA, that protein is in red on top, and on the bottom are tissues, different tissues that are labeled there, where you see it's almost essentially gone. So we just made 3 subtle changes to that little snippet of DNA and eventually, essentially wiped out the expression of that gene. So that's a pretty doggone important code. So just those subtle edits have that profound effect. And we were pretty proud of that because we were the first in the world to actually use CRISPR to show that proof of principle. So this is a very important snippet of DNA. How many snippets of DNA like this are there in the genome? God only knows. I always sing that song in the lab, and they always make fun of me. Beach Boys fan, what can I tell you? Anyway, I don't know. I have no idea, but there's millions for sure. Millions and millions of these little snippets. And we proved one, very, very important. Now let me tell you this last story. I'm going biologically nuts on you now, okay? So on top is a schematic of CRISPR, and I love CRISPR so much, and I frequently lecture on it. I go and speak to the New York State Teachers Association in the fall about it. The classrooms are getting it. In New Mexico, the high school classrooms are getting it. Colleges for sure, and you're getting it tonight. So, but in this experiment, now this is a gene. It's called LMOD1. I don't know if it's up here. It doesn't matter. It's called LMOD. Oh, you might see it somewhere. LMOD1. Anyway, there's 2 snippets. By the way, those snippets are very similar to the ones in the other gene I told you about. Okay. And so we thought, ooh, if we CRISPRize those, can we kill the expression of this LMOD1 gene? The answer is no, we can't. I don't have the data, because Jeremy was telling me to get my butt in gear and get And I honestly just could not get the data on it. But it doesn't do anything. So here's an instance where a very similar code, we did the same mutations and nothing happens. Protein's fine. So those snippets of DNA are dispensable. You might say they might be junk. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're junk. But they're dispensable for the turning on of this gene. Now, same gene, this is the last point, okay? I don't know how much time I have. I hope I'm not going over too much.
You got 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Good. We're going to finish early. By the way, Coldplay's coming.
Oh, it's my daughter.
Sorry about that. Same gene, LMI1, okay? We're CRISPRizing now differently. I'm not going to go into the details because I don't have time. I wish I had time to tell you all the details and really get you jazzed about it. But we did a different kind of CRISPRization, if I can invent that word on the fly, of the gene. So here is the exon. That's where the coding sequence is for this LMOD1. And what we did, we CRISPRized it, and we changed it so that the normal amino acid, the array of designed amino acids, now has been disrupted, and now it's something else. Okay, God only knows. We don't know. But look, notice what happens. Previous CRISPRization, nothing. This one, real problems with this gene. Real buku problems. By the way, these are unpublished data, and I always get excited about presenting unpublished data to my colleagues, but I'm particularly excited to share with you all tonight. This is hot off the press, not published yet, but we are jazzed about this, and this is coming. We're going to publish this as soon as we can. So these are the workers I have to talk. Kudos to Mike and Orazio and Christine, and Jeremy knows who they are. They're doing the work. I'm just sort of going like this. But this type of mutation completely wipes out the expression of the gene. So there it is. So all you have to know is that the protein's present, it's gone. Protein's gone with this mutation. But not only is it gone, the animals are gone too. I'm sorry, we do work with mice. The reason why we work with mice is because we want to cure ailments in humans, okay? And the mice are bred specifically to do the research. They're not the mice you find in pet stores. So the mice in pet stores are safe. The mice in laboratories are bred specifically just to do experiments. I just want to be clear because I know we have the youngster in here. I don't want to get them all upset. The mice don't do well. They actually die almost immediately after birth. And these are real pictures. So this is a normal mouse stomach, and this is a mutant mouse stomach. That's a normal mouse bladder, and that's a mutant mouse bladder. So by doing this little subtle edit, we completely destroyed the protein and the animal. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this, I'm contrasting two things. So we made a subtle edit in one case, and we thought, oh, we were going to see the same thing we saw in the first case where there's no, it didn't do anything. But in this case, complete abolishment of the protein and death to the animal. Now, I want to ask you a question. If we just somehow evolved, I don't like that word, but we used it in everyday language. If we evolved from a primordial soup and everything was arrayed magically with no direction whatsoever, then how is it that mutations can occur in snippets of DNA on the one hand that, I didn't tell you the whole story, I would predict would have a really big effect, but they actually did not have any of them. And on the other hand, very close by the way, this isn't far away from those other mutations. It's maybe 100 to 200 nucleotides away, very, very tiny distance away, has a devastating effect. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But here's what I do know, and I'm wrapping up here, is that the genome is just filled with code, with coded information that's critical for all these things, including at the very bottom here, the repair of mutations. So as I'm speaking now, a lot of your proliferating cells, like in the lining of your gut and in your mouth, your skin cells, they're turning over and there's mutations happening. And there are repair processes, there are codes in the DNA that repair mutations. So could it be, now this is a hypothesis, could it be that the repair over one part of the genome is biased because it's really critical. You don't want to mess with what I just showed you, because otherwise it's death at birth. Whereas the repair at other places, like the one just a couple hundred tides upstream, may be a little more relaxed. Could it be that? Could it be as simple as that? Maybe. And I think that might be a testable hypothesis. But for sure, what we know from what I just shared with you just a little bit today, the information in our genome is must-have. I mean, I'm sorry, but you have to be a moron to not concede that it had to have been directed in some manner through design. All right. So now I'm going to wrap up with these little questions to consider. Could it be that it arose naturally? Well, I don't know. Particularly when you look at the complexity of it. So I mentioned earlier, there's like 100,000 genes, and it's just crazy. This is what I want to leave you. And this is my faith. I stand by it until I die. You can shoot me right now. Saw my head off. This is what I live by. Purposeful codes. Gotta be. It's gotta be. Every single code. I only talked about really a couple of coding code proteins and regulatory codes that turn on them. Lenny touched upon this a little bit. There's no known specified information containing code that is not a design. Think computer code. How many people here write computer code? Please raise your hand. Please raise your hand. There's got to be some computer geeks. Okay. You guys are designing all these codes. You're back to your masterful. You know what you're doing. By the way, I just hired a computer code guy to help us with the research. I love you. Awesome. But you're designing things. Information in DNA was designed. It's unquestionable. That means that it must be that the designer DNA must have intelligence, and the design was God. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And how much time did it take?
You have 3 more minutes. So.
A few more minutes?
3 more, yeah.
3 more? Okay, good. So that was good. I never know how much I'm going to talk. And that clock isn't reliable because it's dead. It's dead. So, but that's all I have to say. And now we will move to what I think will be the most exciting part of the evening, which is some Q&A and some beating back and forth. But let me just be clear about one thing. Lenny said this beautifully, which is, we don't know it. We don't actually know. We know Jack, actually. To tell you the truth, we know Jack. And what I love about my job is that every single day I go into the lab, not every single day, but every week, something new is revealed to me. But it's been known. CRISPR's been around for as long as bacteria have been on this planet. But we just discovered it like a few years ago. And so that's what I get jazzed about. And I'll stop there. And thank you for your attention, and we'll move now to the next phase of the evening.
All right, thank you, Joe. Yeah, we are going to be moving on to our question and answer time. So if Len and Joe and also Jeremy can make their way up, and I think they're going to sit on the edge of the stage is what I've been told, at least by Len. So they're going to come up and do that. I want to explain to you guys real quickly, there are a few different options you have for asking questions. First option is obviously the most direct way, and that is if you want to speak a question, you have that opportunity. If you want to do that, you can raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you, or if you really want to save me a few steps, you can walk on up to me and I'll hand you the microphone. Either way, you can ask your question and they'll respond. That is the most direct way. However, there is a couple other ways for those of you who may not want to speak out loud in that type of sense. First of all, we got the old-fashioned way. On each side of the stage, you'll see that there are white cards with pens. You can write your question on a card, and then if you just leave it over there on the, apart from the ones that are blank, I will grab them and read them by the time we end. That's one way that we can do it. Now also, if you have a smartphone or a tablet with you or your computer, you can do it the high-tech way, so I've been told. I wouldn't know because I'm not high-tech, but if you go onto our website, veritasforum.net, right at the top of the page, right at the top of the mobile site, you can actually click on Submit a Question. Now, if things are working correctly, an email should be sent to my phone, in which then I can read the question through via email. So we're gonna see if that works, so that's an option you have as well. So it's all Jason for you, so we thank you so much, Jason. All right, so we're gonna get started in just a minute. I think the first question that I do want to just to start off with, you guys have been introduced to Len, you guys have been introduced to Joe, but I think it's only fair to give Jeremy just a few minutes to introduce who he is, why he's here, and what he brings to the table as far as the Q&A panel. So if you do that, that'd be great.
Sure, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jeremy. I kind of founded this thing, but these guys are too kind. We have found that people pretty much form their worldviews between the ages of 18 and 25. And we put forums on so that you can hear certain sides, be persuaded, be non-persuaded. We want to hear your voice. We want you to get the opportunity to talk to people who have studied these fields. Just so the Lord has, I guess, kind of assembled us together over a long period of time. I'm not going to really tell too much about myself. My background is in theology and philosophy. I have a degree in theology, biblical studies with an emphasis in biblical archaeology. I study anything from the historicity of the resurrection to ethics to the problem of evil. I have some colleagues over here. Dr. Jerry Woodward is a psychiatrist, and Dr. Peter Ho, who you'll hear next week, has a doctorate in ministry from Westminster Theological Seminary. So we just we come in as a group, and we come to serve you, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions. We really want to get to know you. So that's pretty much what I've done, I guess. Academically, I've spoken pretty much around the Eastern Seaboard. I guess if you want a high-profile talk, I did a talk for the United States Marine Corps on ethics down in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So, but you're free to ask whatever you want. This is an open game. You were courteous enough to come, so we want to hear from you. That's all.
All right, with that, is there anybody that would like to start us off with a question? I haven't got anything on my phone yet, so. We got a hand over here. Okay, great.
The question is about the T-Rex bones, because you said it's pretty much impossible that the bone's as old as they say it is because of the blood vessels. Theoretically, how long could blood vessels last like that?
Well, what they do is extrapolate evidence. They've had things in vacuum jars and liquid nitrogen, and they see what the tissue looks like after 50 years, and they dig things up that they know how long it's been. And so they kind of try to extrapolate how long tissue would last, how much DNA lasts. DNA is, I believe, very, very fragile in the sense that it would break apart and probably be unrecognizable after maybe 250 to 1,000 years. But until this T-Rex thing happened, even Wikipedia said 5,000 to 10,000 years tops before tissue would be a pretty white powder, just from cosmic rays, even if it was really well preserved in vacuum jars. So now the belief-saving device is happening. Now they're trying to come up with how, if proteins and tissue get encapsulated a certain way, then there is no lifespan. It's gonna remain forever. See, and it's like, well, so okay, they changed the science to agree with the new evidence rather than saying, wait a minute, all our evidence before said tissue degrades at a predictable rate, and now it's not because you found a tissue that must be 70 million years old. Therefore, so all the grant money is going into how the tissue can last 70 million years, without regard to the possibility that this might be evidence that they should look at, whether or not this is evidence for the dinosaurs not going extinct long ago. It's really weird when you see cave paintings of stegosauruses. I mean, did they dig up stegosaurus fossils and then dry paintings and then put men on top as if they were writing these things? It's just, these cave paintings are weird in the belief system that dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, and we didn't evolve from apes until 7 million years ago. It's kind of weird. So there's a contradiction between anecdotal evidence and scientific observable evidence, and what all the grant money is going toward working with the same paradigm that we used to work at. If these people were in charge, we would still be the center of the solar system, because they wouldn't allow any other thing in there, you know? It's kind of frustrating. Right now, I'm gonna give this to Joe, but I don't wanna forget. I actually, finally, somebody did a carbon-14 dating on the T-Rex tissue. Before that, they claimed, oh, it must be a contamination. That was the really sick device. That didn't work. And then they went, oh, it must have been something else. And then they had all these explanations on why you could have this tissue in a T-Rex. And then they started digging up other large femur bones, and then museums already had the bones in there, and they started MRIing them. I made that word up. And they cut those open, and son of a gun, there was tissue in those things. I was like, yeah, large fossilized bones get fossilized from the outside in, and it encapsulates what's inside, and the inside is still juicy. You should see video of this stuff where they're pulling this tissue, and it's stretchy and spongy. I can't even get my ham sandwich to do that after a week, and they're just like, you know. So, you know, it's a faith to believe it's 65 million years old now. And they're just scrambling for another explanation so that they can keep their worldview. So I made a copy of carbon-14 dating of the T-Rex. So feel free to make 50 copies or something. So if you want one, they're right up here.
I just want to add a little bit to that. I remember when that T-Rex paper came out in Science, I immediately, as I'm sure thousands of other scientists did, I immediately emailed the woman who made the stellar discovery. And the question, of course, was, is there any genomic DNA that we could study there? And at the time, of course, because it was right after the paper came out, she was like, well, obviously we don't know, but we're very interested to find out. The long and short of it is there was no DNA. So just further testament to your point about macromolecules like DNA hanging around. Yeah, you could have a rubbery blood vessel around, but that information code is toast, or whatever word you want to use.
All right. How long did the DNA code last after death?
I'm going to be gross and ask, do you mean if the body is fixed or unfixed? So if the body's fixed, then, so the answer is I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to be an honest scientist and tell you I don't know the exact answer to that. But I imagine if the body's fixed, it will last longer than if it's unfixed, because I don't have to go into the details, but it's not going to last long is the point, because there's a lot of, I'm going to get techno on you. Is that okay to get techno on you guys? So there are a lot of nucleases or proteins that encode for enzymes that chew up DNA and RNA that are more stable than the DNA, and they'll chew the DNA up. So what that time frame is, interesting question.
All right, we actually do have a few questions that have come across, and it's actually working. So our first question online is from Tim Martin, and his question is this. Yeah, you don't have to give your name, but if you do, I'm going to say it. So
we still don't know who Tim Martin is unless Tim Martin
right.
stands up.
There you go. All right.
Real Tim Martin, please stand up.
And the question is specifically for Dr. Miano, and that question is this. If your colleagues are looking at the same unbelievable and complex information about DNA and also the genome, then why do they still disagree with you about design? What reasons would they give?
Well, they'd hold on to, as Professor Ortenzi tried to explain in his seminar, they would hold on to their worldview of naturalism, right? So that it honestly, it really is religiosity. And by the way, I hate that word. I'm not a religious person. I'm a Christian. We can talk about that if you like privately, but I'm not a religious person. So it's their religion, it's their indoctrination, it's their faith-based worldview of naturalism. So let's just say that we politely disagree, and I'll often, and I don't get a lot of flack from people, from colleagues of mine, or maybe they're just talking behind my back. I don't know, but I often will go to blogs and I'll see something published in Nature and I'll just roll my eyes like, man, I don't have time for this, but man, I gotta just respond to it. And I'll post something, and And it's provocative, and then I get accused of, oh, what are you, some kind of idiot? And I say, no, I'm an NIH-funded investigator. I have 2 R01s, totaling over $2 million. I have 112 publications. I'm a full professor. So it's a good question, but at the end of the day, at the end of the hour, it's faith, my friend. It's faith. So I would much rather have my faith put into something that's much more plausible, not to mention all the other goodies, than something that just is in my brain. And believe me, my brain's going all the time. Just ask my kids. That my brain just can't get its arms around. It's just antithetical to what I know to be true. So it's naturalism. It must be my religion. That's the answer. Not my religion.
I just wanted to comment that you brought up a very interesting point. The funding is amazingly skewed toward anybody that keeps the evolutionary paradigm. So if a student wants to get an objective view of the research, they have to really work hard, because if you don't agree with the paradigm, even crappy data and crappy research is being funded if it's evolutionary themed positive. If you have amazingly good research that might question that worldview and that paradigm, you're not going to get funded. There's people that have gotten fired. I don't know if you ever saw that movie long ago called Expelled, but that stuff's for real. The people that actually lost their jobs because they dared to question that worldview. But from a student point of view, you should be extremely offended. And I tell students, if you're an atheist, you should also be extremely offended by lack of openness and lack of academic freedom to learn these things. You're paying a fortune. You really should first ask your professor what their worldview is, because they're not going to be able to teach you their subject area without also sharing with you their eyesight and their worldview. It's a valid question. You're the customer. Ask them, what is your personal view on this? And then you'll know what filters they have in front of their mouth on what they're teaching you. And then you could decide as a critical thinker whether or not that makes sense from an objective scientific point of view, or are they amazingly slanted toward another worldview because of their religious beliefs, even if they don't believe they're religious. There's nothing wrong with being religious if you just admit it. I mean, when a mentalist does tricks and he looks like he's reading your mind and pretending that he's talking to your dead relative, and at the end of the show he goes, that was all I was reading, your micro cues. It's all just mentalism. It's science. It's me reading your facial expressions. I got no problem with that. They know they're a magician, but they know they're tricking you and they admit it. What I get offended with is the Long Island medium who actually does the exact same thing, but not as well, and tricks a bunch of 9-year-olds into thinking she's talking to their mother. I mean, there's a special place for people like that would deceive children. So, I don't mind somebody who's got a belief system. I have one, and I'll share it all the time, just be honest. I have a naturalistic worldview. That's what I want to hear from somebody. I'm going to teach my students that this is how it happened because I have a naturalistic worldview. And I admit it. And I'm not going to pretend it's science. I'm not going to put my lab coat on and think I'm superior to you. It's just yet another worldview, and both of them are not testable. That's all I wanted them to do. Just be honest.
And also for those believers, be brave. So I'm in the sea of atheism in academia. And, let's see. I advertised this symposium. I didn't think anybody would make the 75-mile drive down. But nevertheless, I advertised it locally. And I got into a little conversation with the chief of cardiology at Strong, who's a colleague of mine. We published together, or will be publishing together, I should say. And his comment was, when he asked me, well, what is your worldview essentially? And I said, well, you're a creationist. I go, yeah. And his comment simply was this, well, don't be teaching biology anytime soon for me. And so, but don't be, but that's what I expect to hear, and that's what I've heard. Don't be, I'm talking to the students and the adults for that matter, don't be intimidated and don't be shy about your faith, about your worldview, okay?
All right, I have a few more online, but I'm gonna take a live one first, right back there.
Hello, I'm Jason, by the way. So you're gonna have to bear with me. This may stray into like philosophy or something. That's kind of about predetermination. I don't know. So if we believe that we were in fact created by design, I guess I'm not looking for an answer, just more what you believe, your opinion. Was it some sort of grand equation for everything that determined how everything works, and that equation was just press go and left to its own devices and everything just happened? Or was that equation, press go, everything happened, but then the designer, do they have a hand periodically in how things work? Like, am I unique? Am I being affected by the designer, or am I just a result of variables being pushed through an equation, I guess? Sure. No, that's a great question. Pretty much what you're asking is the difference between deism and biblical Christianity. Deism was made well known here by Ben Franklin. He was a deist. Thomas Jefferson was sort of a deist, where it's an idea that there was some beginner or first cause who kind of wound up the clock and let everything go. Is that correct, Jason? That's where you're going, okay. Or is it a creator who has the utmost detail, intimate, knows you personally and thought of you, and that's all philosophy. It depends on your worldview, but the thing of it is anybody can make an answer for that, and it can be circular because all they can say is, well, there you are, that proves my theory. So then it goes into what Len talked about was your presuppositions. What do your presuppositions make any sense? What basis or what authority do we have to make this? And what we do is this kind of thing called analogies, where if a certain document or a certain individual makes right statements about certain things, can we trust them about other things, and we test that thing? Well, the scriptures are the most tested documents ever. I mean, they have been put forth to the severest criticism, but you would have to think, Jason, look how unique you are. And Psalm 139 talks about the thoughts of God towards you. So yes, we believe in a God who is very concerned about you and the utmost details of your life. And I know where you're going with this question, possibly is the fact of the problem of evil, where it seems like God is apathetic to these most horror tragedies that we see here in life. And it can be from somebody's close relative or best friend getting sick to a tsunami. Where is God in that? And that's a good question. And David Hume, skeptics like that, I mean, the problem of evil is, it's funny because to me, as a philosopher, it proves my case more than it denies my case, because there's an ought that's implied in there. Tsunamis ought not to happen, but they happen. Little kids in pediatric intensive care, that shouldn't happen. I know a doctor who is a good friend of mine. He's a surgeon in pediatric medicine, and the PIC unit is his specialty. So the answer to the problem of evil is I don't know. But I can tell you this, my worldview is a Christian where Jesus is always going before us. And he jumped into the problem by becoming a man. He didn't back away and just kind of give a scholarly answer. He actually imbibed human flesh, came here, died, said he conquered death, and then you, Jason, you would have to analyze the historicity of the resurrection, the reliability of scripture, which I'm not going to go into. If you want to talk about that later, we can. But think about, if deism is true, and I'm just going to leave you with this, and the resurrection is not, then there's no hope for justice for any of us. So I want you to think about this very, very hard, and especially somebody in here who's gone through a big-time tragedy. That if Jesus doesn't rise from the dead, even Colonel Radnauer told Billy Graham this after World War II, there's no hope for humanity. Because what if some perpetrator corrupts a little 2-year-old kid? I want to talk to the parents out here for a second. And that perpetrator never gets caught here on earth and dies, and the grave is the end to everything. What then? Those are the questions that bother us. But those are the questions that possibly God is asking us to wrestle with so we can truly get to know him more than on a superficial basis. And that would be my answer to your question.
I just want to be on the record saying that, awesome question, by the way, I never heard it before. Really nice job, Jason. And I never thought about it till now, but I guess I subscribe to the notion that there was a beginning, he created it. And by the way, he spoke it. It's interesting in the Bible how he speaks existence. I mean, how beautiful is that? That it can be, I know it's hard for you guys probably to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine that, right? But he just spoke life. And everything happened through his word. Anyway, and then I also believe very much in prayer. And so prayer is important. So I believe that through prayer, all things are possible.
I'm going to answer it totally different. I'm a physicist, and I got really excited realizing that if this deity lived outside of our space-time domain, what seems annoyingly big in gaps and almost neglect on his part is nothing compared to something that lives outside our time domain. There is no other holy book I've ever read about where it describes the creator to be outside of the space-time continuum. In other words, he inhabits eternity, which is a fancy way of saying your concept of time limits you into a linear progression, and God is above that. It's not like God has a lot of time. That's not what eternity means. It means the outside of time. So the only thing I can describe is people at a parade, and you got to wait for the next float to turn the corner, and go, oh, that's a pretty one, and then the next one, oh, look at that one. And God's like hovering in a helicopter, and he sees the beginning from the end. He sees the entire parade now. Right? There's no concept of has to wait. So I believe that he has actually broke through and became so limited being a human being. It is incredible that somebody, something, some deity that lived outside of time and space would be willing to give up all that and become stuck in this little baby that poops its pants and has to scrape its knee and live in linear time. That must have been weird. I mean, everybody talks about, in my worldview, what he did for us. And I think, well, what did he give up? You know, it's just a really cool concept to know that if God is what Isaiah said, living in, inhabits eternity, the end from the beginning, it's all the same. It's all now to him. If somebody asked a deity like that, what do I tell them is your name? Who do I say sent me? What would a deity like that be able to respond to that question? He'd say, I am. See, it's not I was or I will be. It's all now to me, you know? And so to be able to know that he did push the button in the beginning before time began. If you look at the original Hebrew, it's not it said Christ was crucified from the foundations of the earth. If you really look at it, the word chronos shows up in the Greek translation. It means before time was. This is what happened. So God loved you enough where before space, time, matter, and energy existed, he knows you. I didn't say knew you, knows you, and provided a way to have a relationship with you in spite of our screw up. It's just extraordinary to me that in his time, lack of time, the solution was there the moment he knew there would be a problem. Before there was physically a problem, he had the solution. That's extraordinarily loving to me. And that we have to put up with this waiting in our linear time. And when we get to a place where we're like him and we see things face to face, we're gonna go, oh, it was like nothing compared to eternity. That was just smoke, man. That was just a pop quiz, you know? And I don't mean to demean our problems in this world, because he cares that much about it, that he cares about your daily life. But man, compared to what's coming, it's almost like just a joke.
So, other questions? Was there another one online?
Yeah, we do have another one online, and that is from Kate. And she asks, how do you explain things like dinosaurs in outer space, along with so many other things that aren't mentioned in the Bible?
Dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs in outer space, how do you explain them since they're not mentioned in the Bible?
I'm a little stumped. Dinosaurs were in outer.
And outer space.
And
Oh.
outer space.
Oh.
And.
I was like, dinosaurs from outer space. I thought it was like a great little show. That's definitely, yeah, dinosaur panspermia. I believe dinosaurs were mentioned in the Bible. The word dinosaur means terrible lizard. We made up that name. But there's not a culture on this planet that doesn't have dragon legends. And if you look at the book of Job, there's distinctively two very scary creatures that God's pointing out that, you know, they're so big and bad, they're not even scared of humans. You know, that when they walk, it thunders. When we have actually a Seismosaurus as one of the names of our long-necked dinosaurs, it's great. That's, you know, Seismosaurus, this thunder lizard, you know? I mean, and, you know, Job describes this thing that's got a tail like a cedar tree, and the King James Version thought it was a hippo, you know, and the Leviathan they thought was an alligator because, you know, they hadn't dug up dinosaurs yet to know that these creatures could have been around in Job's day. That was scaring the bejeebies out of these people because they you know, spit fire, you know. And before you completely disregard dragons as only something you're going to see on Game of Thrones and it really didn't happen, it might have happened. There's animals that somehow have two different glands. How's this for design? And the bombardier beetle shoots two different chemicals out of its butt, and one chemical ignites the other chemical, and the reaction actually is like a flamethrower out of the anus of a beetle. And boy, that bird that was thinking about eating that one learns fast and goes and tells his friends to leave those alone, you know? And it's just extraordinary that, you know, you could actually cause ignition with two different chemicals coming out of there. You know, did one gland evolve before the other? No, the beetle would have exploded. You know, the other gland invented was evolved before that evolved, and he would have burned himself up every time he tried that move. You know, it had to happen at the exact same time. So there you go. You don't think God has a good sense of humor.
Outer space, what was the other part? The part about just, the issue is just, I think she's asking, so there's a lot of things about science that are not mentioned in Scripture. Scripture's not meant to be a scientific textbook, but where it passes over on science, it's shown to be accurate. Even in the Psalms, this has been discovered. Also in Job 26:7, the Bible says that the earth hangs on nothing. Isaiah 40:12 says God sits on the circle of the earth, things like that. So we can affirm some things. Now, does that automatically make it all true? Of course not. I mean, we have to analyze and study and so forth. The hardest part is the fact that the Bible's it's not going to say, well, look to this in a sense. Now, Jesus does say, if you don't believe my words, look at my work's sake in John 10:37. But what's interesting is the Bible cannot appeal to any higher authority than himself, God, the writer himself. So he's not going to say, well, if you do enough study and you study enough published articles, then you'll find out how the Bible speaks about outer space. But where the Bible passes over on science, it's been accurate to the point in Psalms. It talks about the sun almost having its own orbit and dragging this solar system. That's something that's been much recently found, so things like that.
Yeah, and very timely, I left some booklets that are available outside that speak to some of these issues as well. So you're welcome to take those and read them over. Very short reads.
All right, do we have another live question? Go with Alex first.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm just wondering, to get funding for your research, do you ever have to kind of lie about faith or anything, or just make it so that it seems like you'll get money even though you don't?
Oh boy, don't get me started on this one. All right, I don't lie. Oh, okay, let me back up. I sin, I lie. Okay, yes, we all lie. But I don't do that. But I will say this, there's a temptation to. It's there. And I was going to put this in the talk, but I didn't have time. But let me just briefly say something about truth. So I wrote a little piece, and Jeremy knows about it. What is truth? That's one of my favorite questions in the whole Bible. So I just Pilate to Jesus. What is truth? Jesus doesn't say anything either, which is very interesting because he is the truth. He's like, here is the truth. I don't even say anything. Anyway, so I wrote a piece on what is truth, and the reason why I did that because there is pervasive scientific integrity in the world. There are scientists who falsify data, and regrettably. So it does happen. And by the way, the money that we get here is from your tax dollars. I think I mentioned that. So when you pay your taxes, it goes to the government, and we get a little small piece of that. So I want to thank all of you, by the way, for funding my research program, as every honest investigator should do. So unfortunately, it is pervasive, and I wrote a piece, and if you're interested in reading it, I can pass it your way. Just you can email me, and I'll send it your way. What is truth? It's scientific and trade. Very important.
You have, are mutations mistakes? I mean, are they not a negative thing? And in DNA, are there not several languages in the programming, not just one language, all simultaneously working together? And then someone like this gentleman, is he uniquely programmed from someone else? Is his DNA uniquely programmed? I mean, this is real interesting to me, this stuff.
So I would say yes to the question regarding multiple languages, and I hit upon it a little bit with regards to the snippets of DNA that encode for elements. Yeah, and I didn't have time, obviously, to go into the different other codes because it's a beautiful orchestration, actually. I'm sitting here trying to imagine it even now, of just so many things happening in a beautiful symphony, and it all happening right. Now, having said that, mutations happen, absolutely. And I mentioned one of the codes are these repair codes, and there are repair mechanisms. And by repair codes, what I mean are there hotspots in the genome where, for example, the last example I showed you, where if you mess with that, that's devastating, and obviously those animals aren't going to breed, and the species is extinct. So there are codes hardwired in the genome that instruct repair mechanisms to repair if anything happens, because they do happen. The answer is absolutely mutations happen. They're happening as we speak in many, many, many thousands of our cells. But thankfully, the designer already figured out that that would happen and has a beautiful repair machinery there to correct it. So, and was there a third question? Because I heard 3 questions in there. Mutations, languages, and what was the last question?
Well, the last one is everyone uniquely
Oh, yes.
programmed? And is there a degradation? Is there a degradation in genetics? Are we falling apart as we go from generation to
Oh,
generation?
Dr. Sanford needs to be here for that. Well, so this is, yeah, I'm gonna pass the microphone. Yes, and that's Psalm 139. Yeah, it's the same Psalm, right? 139. So absolutely unique, and that's the beautiful thing. I mentioned that we all differ between, it's arguable, but between 3 and 10, 12 million, give or take a couple million bases. So we're not identical, and there's a reason for that, because we are all unique, and we all are uniquely programmed. And I gotta be careful what I say. I was gonna go down a path, but I'm not gonna, because there's some youngsters here. But yes, the answer is yes.
I just want to briefly tell you that next week, my talk is going to be discussing the 2 models that we evolved from ape-like creatures versus a perfect man, perfect woman with perfect DNA to start with. And we're going to analyze the 2 models in light of, get ready, science, and whether or not observable science agrees or disagrees with those models. So, hey, come next week.
All right. Also kind of connected with Alex's question about having to lie to obtain funding if you have to do that. Another question was asked online. Have any of you experienced any professional persecution being an evolutionary naysayer? And what advice would you give to other thinkers of faith about that?
Persecuted online, yes. Generally, if you want to stop a conversation with colleagues, you just simply say, what is your worldview? Or let's just get to the point. Do you believe in God? And no, I don't. Do you? Yes, I do. End of conversation, generally, in my experience. I do, as I get older, I'm getting a little bit more brazen, as I should be, regarding my faith. Well, I'm tenured. Does that matter? No, I don't think tenure might matter. I don't know. But I was waiting for tenure to land, actually. Yes, persecution, absolutely. The advice, okay, you're not gonna like it. I have to be honest, right? Because I told you I don't lie, okay, except once in a while. But I was a closet Christian in the science world for a long, long time. I just didn't reveal my faith, and when the subject came up, I'm sad to say it. It hurts me to say it, but I was ashamed and felt, and all this terrible stuff. But so I hid it for a while. But don't hide it. Don't do what I did. All I can tell you is to stand firm in your conviction and read. So Professor Ortenzi mentioned something very important, which is we can't just read biblical scripture and say, well, everything's fine. You need to know the other worldviews. I mean, this guy is as well read as anybody on the planet I know. And he can speak really with authority on any subject because he's well read. I wish I had time to do more of this reading, but I don't because I have to get the grants so that I can pay the people in my lab and CRISPRize things. But you want to get educated. And by the way, now it's easy, right? You can just Google things. You can't trust everything online, but you can. Information is just, we're in an information world. So get educated so that you're prepared for persecution. And if you're not the way I was and you're braver than I was, then you'll be convicted to speak your truth. And hopefully you can engage the person. And we try to do it in a compassionate way as opposed to a compassionate way as opposed to a combative way, because the other side, if you will, tends to be a bit more combative. And a lot of times you can see that in debates. You'll see the Christian apologetic relaxed in their recliner like this, at ease, and then the doubter, the atheist, you can see it in their nonverbal gestures, how uptight they are. So do it with compassion and love, and just speak your convictions.
Well, to answer the question, if I get persecuted, I'm just so bad. I have a tendency to not worry about picking the fight. So I get into discussions all the time with colleagues. I've had my chair of the physics science tech. He told me how you got to stop talking about your religion in class. And I said, well, that's an interesting thing. I never mention my religion in class. You should sit in. And if you don't worry. I recorded it in case you were going to talk to me about this. And he went, oh, I go, so let's listen. And then I said, and then I made him listen to the teaching I was doing on critical thinking and the scientific method. And I said, let's pick some controversial issues and apply the scientific method. Let's do global warming. And then we did global warming. And I said, okay, let's do old Earth versus young Earth. And, you know, who believes in the old Earth? And I said, okay, and I brought him up. Who believes in the young Earth? I brought him up, and I made them switch so that the old Earth person had to argue for young Earth, and the young Earth person had to argue for an old Earth. And I said, is there anything about this that contradicts the point I have to teach in a gen ed course all about the scientific method? Is there anything about my method you disagree with? And my chair had to say, nope. And I said, well, then somebody who didn't agree with a worldview they might have heard that I might have had is the one who made stuff up about me. We should sit down and talk with that student if they have a problem with it. And suddenly the student was gone, but my student showed me his 40-minute rant on YouTube about how Hortense went too far. You know, so you have stuff like that. You have people accusing me. Like I said, I get persecuted from the atheists that I talk to because they have trouble with my arguments about dogs and chihuahuas and DNA and the genome and how it's falling apart. They have trouble with the science, so they attack me. Hey, it's part of the game. I have tenure too.
All right, well, our time is almost up, but I do want to find out if there's one more question. Okay, we got two hands, so we'll do 2 questions, but remember, we got 5 minutes, guys, so, all right.
You said a person should be well-read. Is there a list of titles that you would recommend? Either for a believer or for skeptics?
What depends on the field. What is there a particular area you're particularly interested in? You want me to just, I will unroll a list that will never end. We have 5 minutes. No, and you're not going to get near my nerd bag. It's in the Ark of the Covenant. Oh. Anyway, no, I'll give you a couple. If you're really interested in science, a few of the books, Lenny showed Dr. Werner Gitt's book. He's really good, but I usually just go like this. If you want the worldviews, like what Len was talking about, 2 books: Can Man Live Without God by Ravi Zacharias, and 2, Why I'm Not a Christian by Bertrand Russell, who is a famous atheist. You need to read both sides, because if something's true, it can stand up to the test of scrutiny. Same thing with scriptures. Read Bart Ehrman's book, Misquoting Jesus, and then read the book either Jesus Under Fire or that 1,200-page book called The Enduring Authority of Scripture, actually, which just came out this year. And it's good for weightlifting, too. It's a lot of pages, but it's really, really good.
All right, we'll give,
Just scientifically, and you don't have time to read 1,200 pages, then I like to go to Talk Origins, which is the atheistic answer to all these lies that the Christians are making up. And so they come up with their answers to why in the fossil record there's trees, polystrata trees this way, and how could it be millions of years with a tree that way? That means the top of the tree was exposed for 1 million years. You get their response, their answers to those things. And then Institute for Creation Research are good scientists. Dr. Sanford works with them, Answers in Genesis is also quite good. And just reading just articles, a page or two long on some subject you were wondering about or what, you know, you heard some point of view and you want to know what that point of view was from a worldview of Christian or a worldview of secular. It's kind of fun to read them both. So those two would be great suggestions from a scientific point of view in all areas, genetics, astronomy, everything, Big Bang, dark energy, dark matter. I love those. The ultimate belief-saving device.
Discovery Institute has some good stuff too. Stephen Myers. I draw a lot of my stuff from Dr. Stephen Myers.
Okay, this will be our last question of the night.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned perhaps the shortfalls of the modern classroom and the openness of teaching, it just isn't there. Could you just give us, and you kind of answered this 2 questions ago, but just kind of a snapshot of how you, with complete control, would structure a classroom setting for ideal learning and openness to different
Yeah, that's my whole theme. I'm teaching physics and I want them to think critically and analyze evidence and think empirically, think objectively, think operational science, observable science. So I spend a good week and a half training them, and they come in with what they read in the newspaper about that rock they found in Antarctica that definitely came from Mars, and they're finding their own BS devices that they're investigating for me, and they're not I had some students there clearly, but I made it open and comfortable to completely disagree with me. And I say this, I go, guys, you really don't know what I believe yet because you haven't gone to lunch and listened to my personal opinion. But I am trying to train you by giving you another point of view to realize that you're on shaky ground if you think it was proven that my way is right. You know, and if you're a Christian or an atheist, you're still on shaky ground when it comes to science. If you can't test it, and you can't use the scientific method, then you're talking about historical evidence, which is a different rule book. And so when the study of origins comes around, you better be an honest scientist and say, I don't know, or you're not getting what I'm trying to teach you. So I start with Monty Python. We found a witch, maybe better, and I start from there, and I just go on until they're trained to realize what good science is and what bad science is, and then we have a blast all year doing real science and physics. So yeah, invite me to a night, and I'll show you what I do for the first 2 weeks. It's a lot of fun.
All right, well, we are at the end of our night. A couple things I want to let you know before we dismiss you. First of all, we're going to have the same exact thing going on next week. It's going to be across the road over at Alfred University in the Science Center over there. So we'd invite you to come back next week. And if you have more questions, or maybe throughout the week you come up with questions in your mind, come ready to ask those. You can put them online ahead of time so we have them ready to go and all those type of things. Also, you can check out Crew and InterVarsity this week and also ask some questions at those different places as well. So we'd really invite you to come back. Len will be back with us next week speaking again, and also we'll have Dr. Peter Ho, who's going to be with us. He's right there, and he's going to be speaking on the authority of Scripture. Really looking forward to that talk. So next week, same time, just over at AU, we'd really invite you to come. As far as tonight goes, as you leave, right to your right, don't just go out the doors, you're going to miss out, but go right to your right, you've got plates and plates of cookies. We didn't know how many people were going to be here, so we made enough cookies for like 500 people, and well, so you can eat a lot of cookies, that's what I'm saying. So as you go around the corner, if you just go ahead and feel free to grab cookies. There's coffee that I'm hoping is still hot. We're testing out our insulated things and seeing how long it is. And yes, and next week, don't just come yourself. Bring a friend, bring 2, bring 10, bring 20, especially people that may be questioning things about faith and about Christianity. And it'll be a great opportunity for them to ask questions as well. So please invite your friends, bring people with you. We'll see you next week and enjoy some cookies and talk to these guys. I'm sure they'd love it. They'd love to talk to you out in the hall.